Okay, so today we're going to be diving into some really interesting cinematic history.
Oh, yeah.
Do you ever hear of what they call lost films,
Oh, absolutely.
where a movie just disappears
Yeah.
and everyone thinks it's gone forever, and then bam, it pops up again?
Like it's been found in someone's attic or a basement somewhere.
Yeah, and that's what happened with the very first Frankenstein film adaptation,
Wow.
made all the way back in 1910.
That's pretty amazing that we have that that piece of history to look back on.
Yeah, it's a window into early cinema,
Absolutely.
but also how Mary Shelley's story was being interpreted just a couple generations after she wrote it.
Yeah.
So for this deep dive, we've got some really fascinating sources.
Oh, cool.
A mix of modern articles,
Mm-hmm.
encyclopedia entries that give us
Yeah.
the facts,
Right.
but then also some period-specific materials,
Gotcha.
like the Edison kinetogram,
Interesting.
which was like their little studio magazine.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so it gives you a feel for how they were selling this to the public back then.
I see. So we're going for like a three-pronged approach here.
Yeah,
We got first like the technical innovations that would blow people's minds back in 1910.
right.
Then how closely or not
Mhm.
the film actually adapts the novel.
Right.
And then finally, I guess how this Frankenstein kind of sets the stage for all the tropes and the imagery we still see today.
Yeah, the things we know, love, and fear.
Exactly.
All right, so let's set the scene.
Okay.
It's 1910.
Hmm.
You paid your nickel.
Right.
You're sitting down in this dimly lit Nickelodeon.
Yeah.
What's happening on that screen?
Well, first of all, imagine a much shorter experience than you're used to.
Okay.
Frankenstein, 1910, it was a 16-minute one-reeler, so the whole film fit on one reel of film.
Wow, a short blockbuster.
Basically, yeah, like short, impactful, to the point.
Tight production schedule too, huh?
Oh, yeah, 3 days.
3 days.
3 days in the Bronx. And the director, Searle Dawley, he also wrote the screenplay.
Okay.
Now, Dawley, he had this thing for simplifying complex narratives for the screen, which I find really interesting.
Especially for something like Frankenstein.
Yeah, like how do you wrestle with all those philosophical ideas in just 16 minutes?
And you got to have the monster.
Right, can't forget the monster.
This is the first time
Ever.
on film.
Yes.
So people must have been freaking out.
I mean, this is the first time they're seeing it come to life, you know, not just on stage or in their imagination.
So how'd they play it?
Well, the Edison Company, they actually really downplayed the horror.
Really?
Yeah, they were more focused on what they called the mystic and psychological problems of the story.
So more like a psychological thriller kind of vibe.
Exactly. Yeah, less about the scares, more about the ideas, the implications of it all, you know.
Right, right. And it's still early cinema, so people are just getting used to seeing anything on screen, let alone a monster.
Yeah. Exactly. The concept itself was probably mind-blowing enough back then.
So what about Charles Ogle? He played the monster.
Yeah, Ogle, his monster design was really based on a lot of the stage productions.
Okay.
So think hunchbacked, wild hair, kind of raggedy clothes,
Grotesque.
grotesque, but with a touch of the uncanny rather than like outright terrifying, you know?
So not quite the monster we're used to today.
Not yet, but you can definitely see the seeds of that iconic image being planted here.
Right, right. So how do they pull off the creation scene?
Oh, this is cool.
Especially back then.
Yeah, it's for the time, it's super innovative.
Right.
So they build this model of the monster,
Okay.
complete with like an internal skeleton,
Yeah.
and then they set it on fire,
Whoa.
film it,
Okay.
and then reverse the footage.
So it looks that he's being formed out of the flames.
Exactly, like rising from the ashes and the smoke.
That's incredible.
I know. Can you imagine seeing that for the first time in a theater?
I mean, that's got to be mind-blowing.
Right. It's such a clever way to get across that idea of creation.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's not just that. They also use color tinting.
Oh, real?
Yeah, yeah. So like scenes with the monster, they'd be in this amber light, and then the climax would be in teal.
Wow. So the colors really set the mood.
Exactly. It's adding this whole other layer to the experience.
And they were using mirrors, too.
Oh, yeah, in a really clever way. They'd
Right.
position a mirror facing a door that was off screen so the audience could actually see what was coming in behind the character.
So sneaky.
Right. Pure suspense.
Yeah.
And both of the monsters' first and last full body appearances, they're actually done using this mirror trick.
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
Yeah, adds to the mystery and the drama.
All right. So how faithful is this 1910 Frankenstein to Mary Shelley's novel?
Well, it's what we call an in-name-only adaptation.
Oh.
It takes the name, some of the basic elements,
Mm.
but it goes off in its own direction.
Okay, so what are some of the big changes they made?
Well, Frankenstein's motivation is totally different.
How so?
Like in the book, he's, obsessed with uncovering the secrets of life and death.
Hmm.
But in the film, he's like, I want to make the perfect human being.
Oh, wow. So like a more noble goal?
Yeah, almost heroic.
Interesting.
It's definitely a shift away from that whole playing God idea in the novel.
Did they change anything about the monster itself?
They did, yeah. The film kind of presents him as like inherently evil.
Really, from the start?
Yeah, and it's blamed on some darkness in Frankenstein's own mind rather than anything the monster experiences.
So it's like they're simplifying that whole nature versus nurture debate.
Totally, yeah. The film is much more black and white about good and evil.
What about the other characters? Did they mess with anyone else?
Well, Elizabeth, Frankenstein's love interest, she gets a much more symbolic role.
Okay. I did notice that she seemed to represent like pure redemptive love.
Exactly, and it's her love for Frankenstein that actually ends up destroying the monster.
Wow. Talk about a different ending.
Right, way more optimistic than the book.
Yeah, definitely a classic Hollywood ending.
Yeah, and, it might reflect some of the anxieties of the time, like this need to believe in the power of love in the face of something as scary as a man-made monster.
All these changes are really giving me a whole new perspective on this film.
Oh, good.
It's like we're peeling back the layers of history.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
But what was the public's reaction to this Frankenstein back in 1910?
What? Oh.
Were they wowed, horrified, or a little bit of both?
Well, from what I've read, it seems like the special effects, they really made an impact.
I can imagine seeing that creation scene
Oh,
on the
yeah.
big screen for the first time.
You gotta think, people back then, they hadn't seen anything like it.
Right.
That idea of a monster coming to life
Golly,
right there in front of
it
them.
was all new.
It was a novelty.
I wonder if some people were even, like, scared.
Oh, I bet some critics at the time, they actually thought the film was a bit too much for the average viewer. Yeah, like one review in the moving picture world, they even said all the death and the spooky stuff, it might not be suitable for everyone.
It's funny how what was shocking back then
Yeah,
is pretty tame by today's standard.
if bred and used to it.
Yeah, desensitized.
But it does make you think about how norms change,
Yeah,
over time.
definitely.
What was horrifying in 1910 might just get a chuckle from us now.
It's true.
But it also shows the power of film, right? How
Mm.
it can push boundaries, start those conversations
Yeah.
about what we're comfortable seeing on screen.
Absolutely. And speaking of disappearing acts,
Oh, right.
this Frankenstein, after it came out,
Mm-hmm.
it vanished.
It did.
Like poof, gone.
A true lost film.
How does that even happen?
Well, back then, film preservation wasn't really a priority.
Oh, right?
Films were seen as entertainment.
Disposable.
Yeah, and a lot of them were lost.
Right.
Just, neglected, fires, or they just deteriorated over time.
So this Frankenstein, it's like a real-life mystery.
It is. Adds to the mystique, doesn't it?
Absolutely. So how did it turn up again?
All right, so there's this film collector, Alois F. Detlaff.
Mm-hmm.
He stumbles upon a print of the film in the 1950s.
Okay.
But get this, he doesn't realize what it is at first.
Wait, he just has this super rare film
Yeah.
just sitting around?
Pretty much.
Oh, wow.
It took him a while to realize he had a real treasure on his hands.
That's wild. So once they figured out what it was,
Mm-hmm.
what happened?
Well, it definitely sparked this renewed interest in early cinema
Right.
and how horror films have evolved over the years.
Right. Yeah.
And thankfully, there have been a bunch of restoration projects since then,
Oh, good.
including a big one by the Library of Congress in 2018.
So we can actually watch this film today.
We can, yeah, thanks to those dedicated folks who preserve these pieces of history.
Absolutely. Makes you wonder what else is out there
Oh, yeah, lost and waiting to be found.
waiting to be discovered. Yeah, but speaking of treasures,
Mm-hmm.
this 1910 Frankenstein, it's not just some historical oddity.
Right.
It's the granddaddy of all Frankenstein adaptations.
It really set the stage for how we see Frankenstein on film.
It's amazing. A 16-minute silent film
I know, right?
could have such a big impact.
But it just shows you how powerful a story can be,
Mm.
and how these early adaptations, even the ones that take liberties with the source material, they still shape our understanding of the story.
Absolutely. And there were some elements from this 1910 version
Oh, yeah.
that really stuck around.
Oh, great.
Like, you remember that scene where the monster is terrified by its own reflection?
Oh, yeah, that's a classic.
That image pops up in Frankenstein movies all the
It's
time.
so powerful, right?
Yeah, it's really gets at the monster's
Mm.
isolation, its struggle with its own identity.
It's a visual that just, it sticks with you.
And it all started here
It did.
in this this early film.
And it shows you that even back then, the filmmakers, they understood the deeper meaning of Shelley's story.
They really did, and they did it all with very little dialogue and these
Yeah.
really simple techniques.
It had to rely on visuals.
They did.
And symbolism.
To get those ideas across.
Right, they were true pioneers.
Absolutely. And there's another idea from this adaptation
Okay.
that continues to echo through the years.
What's that?
This idea that the monster is really a reflection of its creator's own inner turmoil.
Oh, yeah, that's deep.
Yeah, it's not just a physical creature. It's a manifestation of Frankenstein's own darkness.
His flaws.
His flaws, yeah.
And that adds a whole other layer to the story, doesn't it?
It does. It suggests that the real monster
Mm-hmm.
might be the darkness inside of us.
Exactly, and that's something that so many Frankenstein adaptations have explored over the years.
Yeah.
It's not just about a creature, it's about what that creature represents.
Right.
About our own capacity for both good and evil.
I wonder what Mary Shelley would think
Oh, that's a great question.
about all these different interpretations of her work.
I mean, she was dealing with these themes way back in the 19th century, and they're still relevant today.
Absolutely. This 1910 Frankenstein,
Mm-hmm.
it's given us so much to think about.
Yeah.
Lost films, rediscoveries,
Right.
technical innovations,
Yeah.
and some really thought-provoking themes.
It's a reminder that these stories, they have a life of their own, they evolve,
You do.
they reflect the times they're made in.
Yeah. But why should our listener care?
That's a fair question.
Why does this this deep dive even matter?
Well, I think it reminds us that stories, they change.
They do.
They adapt, they reflect the anxieties and hopes of the time they're told in.
Yeah.
And this 1910 Frankenstein, it's a great example of that.
Absolutely.
It also encourages us to think critically about how we interpret stories, how our own experiences shape our understanding of them.
In Frankenstein, it's a story that still speaks to us today.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, what is it about this tale of a scientist
Yeah.
messing with life and creating this monster
Right.
that we still find so captivating?
It's a timeless story.
It is. And what does our fascination with it say about us?
Exactly.
What are our anxieties about science?
About technology.
Yeah, what are we hoping for?
What are we afraid of?
What about you, listener?
Yeah.
If you were going to adapt Frankenstein for the big screen today,
Uh-huh.
what would you change?
What would you emphasize?
What would your monster represent?
A good question to think about, isn't it?
It is.
It makes us consider how we'd approach those themes
Yeah.
in our modern world.
What would our Frankenstein look like?
What would it say about us?
Now, those are some questions to ponder.
Yeah, it's wild to think that a Frankenstein film could be, like, too scary for people.
Right, but one of those critics back in 1910, you said they thought it was a bit much.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? We're so used to, like, all kinds of horror now.
Mm-hmm.
Slasher films, psychological thrillers, ghosts, everything.
Right, we've seen it all.
But back then, that whole idea of, like, a monster coming to life
Right.
on screen, that was new territory.
It was groundbreaking.
Exactly.
So this 1910 Frankenstein, even though they toned down the horror, it was still kind of pushing the boundaries.
Oh, for sure.
It wasn't just the visuals, it was the whole concept, you know?
Yeah, like, what does it mean to create life?
Mm.
What are the consequences?
And that's what makes it so important.
Absolutely.
It's more than just a monster in a movie.
Right. It's a reflection of how people were feeling back then.
About science, about technology.
Exactly. Like, the world was changing so fast.
Yeah.
And this film, it kind of captures that anxiety.
Makes you wonder, what were they most afraid of?
Mm.
The monster itself.
Or the idea that we were pushing too far.
Right, like playing God.
Yeah, and that's something Mary Shelley was grappling with, too, in her novel.
Right, Frankenstein is not just about a monster.
It's about ambition, responsibility, the ethics of knowledge.
Pushing the boundaries.
And, you know, those themes are even more relevant now.
They are. We're living in this age of, like,
Genetic engineering.
artificial intelligence.
Right. Technology is advancing so quickly.
It could change everything,
It could.
but it could also backfire in ways we can't even imagine.
And that's where Frankenstein comes in. It's that warning,
Right.
that reminder to think about the
It's
consequences.
like a message from the past
Totally.
saying, hey, be careful what you create.
Exactly. And I think that's why we're still drawn to this story.
Yeah.
It forces us to look at ourselves, our relationship with technology,
And the choices we make.
the ethical choices.
This has been a really incredible deep dive
It has.
into Frankenstein 1910,
A 16-minute silent film.
over a century ago.
But it still has so much to say.
Covered it all.
Lost films, rediscoveries,
Mhm.
the technical stuff, the themes.
And it all started with that one film.
Shot in 3 days.
Yeah.
More than 100 years ago.
It's amazing.
It is, and I think it shows us that the best stories,
Mhm.
the ones that stick with us, they're the ones that keep asking those questions.
Challenging our perspectives.
Exactly.
So, listener, next time you see a Frankenstein movie,
Or read about AI.
or even just look in the mirror,
And think about, what makes you.
remember, it all might go back.
To that 16-minute film.
That dared to bring a monster to life.
And in doing so, started this conversation about what it means to be human.
A conversation that we're still having today.